The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Windsor Castle as King Charles sat in his private study, a cup of tea growing cold beside him. His weathered hands held a newspaper, but his eyes weren't focused on the words. Instead, his mind wandered to the changes happening within his family, changes that seemed to grow more noticeable with each passing day. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, had been visiting more frequently lately. Her presence brought a warmth to the castle that reminded Charles of better times when the family felt more united. She would arrive with her children, their laughter echoing through corridors that had seen too much tension in recent years. William would follow, his face lighting up whenever he saw his father genuinely smile. Charles found himself drawn to these family moments in ways he hadn't expected. After years of feeling like an outsider in his own family, watching Catherine interact with his grandchildren gave him hope. She had a natural grace that reminded him of his mother in her younger years, but with a modern touch that made the monarchy feel relevant again. The king set down his newspaper and walked to the window overlooking the garden. Camilla was there, tending to her roses with the same quiet determination she brought to everything. She had been his companion through the darkest times, standing by him when the world seemed against them both. Their love story had been complicated, filled with obstacles and public scrutiny that would have broken lesser people. But lately something had shifted. Charles couldn't pinpoint exactly when it started, but he noticed how Camilla's smile seemed forced during family gatherings. She would excuse herself early from dinners, claiming tiredness or headaches. The easy conversation they once shared had become stilted, filled with long pauses and careful words. Catherine's growing influence within the family was undeniable. The public adored her. The press followed her every move with genuine affection rather than the harsh criticism they had once reserved for royal women. She handled her duties with a confidence that impressed even the most skeptical courtiers. When she spoke at events, people listened. When she appeared at Charles's side during official functions, the cameras focused on her natural charisma. Charles remembered the early days of Catherine's marriage to William. She had been nervous, uncertain about her place in the royal hierarchy. He had watched her struggle with the weight of expectations, the constant scrutiny that came with wearing the crown's invisible chains. But she had grown into her role with remarkable strength, becoming the daughter he had never had. The irony wasn't lost on him. For years he had fought for Camilla's acceptance, wanting the world to see what he saw in her. Now as his reign continued, he found himself appreciating Catherine's qualities in ways that made him question his own relationships. It wasn't that he loved Camilla any less, but rather that he was beginning to understand the different types of connections that could exist within a family. Camilla appeared at his study door, her face carefully composed but her eyes betraying a sadness she tried to hide. She announced that Catherine would be joining them for dinner, along with William and the children. Charles noticed how his wife's voice remained steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. The weight of unspoken tensions filled the room like fog. As evening approached, Charles found himself looking forward to Catherine's arrival with an enthusiasm that surprised him. He wanted to hear about her latest charitable work, to see how she handled the children's questions about royal protocol, to witness the easy way she made everyone around her feel comfortable. These moments had become precious to him, glimpses of what family life could be when built on genuine affection rather than duty alone. The sound of cars on gravel announced their arrival. Charles straightened his tie and checked his reflection, wanting to present himself well. Through the window, he watched Catherine emerge from the car, her dress elegant but approachable, her smile genuine as she helped the children from their seats. William followed, carrying bags and toys with the practiced ease of a devoted father. Camilla joined Charles at the window, standing close enough that he could smell her familiar perfume. They watched the family approach together, but Charles sensed the distance between them growing with each step Catherine took toward the castle entrance. The future was arriving, and with it changes that none of them could have anticipated. Dinner that evening revealed the subtle shifts that had been building within the royal household. Catherine sat across from Charles, her natural elegance making even casual conversation feel significant. She discussed her recent visit to a children's hospital with such passion that Charles found himself leaning forward, genuinely interested in every detail. Her eyes sparkled as she described how the young patients had taught her origami, and how she planned to incorporate art therapy into her future charitable initiatives. William watched his father's reactions with growing awareness. He had noticed the change in recent months, how Charles seemed more animated during Catherine's visits, more engaged with family life than he had been in years. The transformation wasn't dramatic, but it was unmistakable to those who knew the king well. There was a lightness in his demeanor that hadn't been there before, a sense of connection that seemed to energize him. Camilla participated in the conversation, but her contributions felt measured, careful. She complimented Catherine's work with genuine warmth, yet something in her posture suggested withdrawal. She dabbed her mouth with her napkin more frequently than necessary, her movements precise but lacking their usual confidence. The children, oblivious to adult tensions, chattered about their school projects and weekend plans, their innocent voices filling spaces that might otherwise have grown uncomfortable. After the main course, Catherine excused herself to help settle the children in the family room. Charles offered to assist, an offer that surprised everyone, including himself. Together they walked down the familiar corridors, their footsteps echoing in comfortable rhythm. Catherine shared stories about the children's recent accomplishments, her voice filled with the pride of a devoted mother. Charles listened intently, asking questions that showed genuine interest in his grandchildren's lives. In the family room, they worked together to set up a movie for the children. Catherine moved with practiced efficiency, adjusting cushions and finding the remote with the familiarity of someone who had done this countless times. Charles watched her interactions with his grandchildren with growing admiration. She was patient when they argued about movie choices, firm but kind when setting boundaries about bedtime, and genuinely delighted by their silly jokes and observations. The natural way Catherine included Charles in these moments touched something deep within him. She asked his opinion about bedtime stories, sought his advice about managing energetic children, and listened to his memories of raising William with the respect due an experienced parent. For the first time in years, Charles felt truly useful as a grandfather, not just as a distant figure of authority, but as someone whose presence was genuinely wanted and valued. Meanwhile, Camilla cleared the dinner table with the help of the household staff. She moved through the familiar routine automatically, her mind elsewhere. Through the doorway, she could see Charles kneeling beside his grandson, helping with a puzzle while Catherine read to their daughter. The scene was picture perfect, the kind of family moment that photographers would have treasured. But for Camilla, it highlighted her growing sense of being an observer rather than a participant in Charles's evolving family dynamic. Later, as William and Catherine prepared to leave, Charles walked them to their car. The evening air was crisp, filled with the scent of Camilla's beloved roses. Catherine thanked Charles for dinner with genuine warmth, mentioning how much the children enjoyed spending time with their grandfather. She suggested they should do this more often, perhaps even make it a regular tradition. Charles agreed enthusiastically, already looking forward to their next visit. Camilla watched from the window as Charles embraced his daughter-in-law, noting how long the hug lasted, how comfortable they seemed together. She observed William's satisfied expression, his obvious pleasure at seeing his father and wife connecting so naturally. The family unity she witnessed was beautiful, but it also emphasized her own growing isolation within the dynamic. As the car disappeared down the drive, Charles returned to the castle with a spring in his step that Camilla hadn't seen in months. He spoke excitedly about the children's development, about Catherine's upcoming projects, about plans for future family gatherings. His enthusiasm was infectious, but it also felt exclusionary to Camilla, as if she were listening to someone describe a world in which she played only a supporting role. That night, as they prepared for bed, Charles continued talking about the evening. He praised Catherine's natural way with the children, her innovative ideas for royal duties, her ability to make everyone feel included and valued. Camilla listened with growing unease, recognizing that her husband's affection for Catherine was deepening in ways that went beyond simple family appreciation. The woman who had once been the center of Charles's world was beginning to understand that his heart was expanding to include someone new in ways she hadn't anticipated. The following weeks brought a series of official engagements that required Catherine and Charles to work closely together. Their first joint appearance was at a veterans' charity event, where Catherine's natural empathy complemented Charles's formal dignity perfectly. The press noticed immediately how comfortable they seemed together, how their conversations flowed naturally even during the most structured portions of the event. Charles found himself seeking Catherine's opinions on matters beyond family gatherings. During a break between appointments, he asked her thoughts on modernizing certain royal traditions, genuinely curious about her perspective as someone who had entered the monarchy from the outside. Catherine's responses were thoughtful and practical, showing a deep understanding of both public expectations and institutional needs. Her insights impressed Charles in ways that surprised him. The Queen Consort Camilla maintained her own schedule of engagements, but increasingly found herself attending events alone or with other members of the family. She threw herself into her literacy campaigns and domestic violence awareness work with renewed dedication, as if trying to prove her continued relevance within the royal framework. Her staff noticed how she worked longer hours, accepted more invitations, and pushed herself to maintain visibility in ways that seemed almost desperate. During a particularly successful joint engagement at a medical research facility, Charles and Catherine toured laboratories and met with leading scientists. Catherine's questions were intelligent and informed, demonstrating preparation that went beyond basic briefings. She engaged with researchers about their work on childhood diseases with such genuine interest that several commented afterward about her remarkable understanding of complex medical concepts. Charles watched Catherine interact with the medical staff with growing admiration. She remembered details from previous conversations, asked follow-up questions that showed real engagement, and managed to make each person feel valued and heard. Her ability to connect with people from all backgrounds reminded him of the best qualities he had seen in public figures throughout his long life. She possessed a rare combination of intelligence, warmth, and authenticity that made her uniquely effective in royal duties. The media coverage of their joint appearances was overwhelmingly positive. Photographers captured moments of genuine collaboration, images that showed Charles and Catherine as an effective working partnership. Headlines praised their natural chemistry and suggested that they represented the future of a modernized monarchy. The public response was enthusiastic, with social media posts celebrating their apparent friendship and mutual respect. Camilla read these articles in her private sitting room, noting every complimentary phrase about Catherine's performance alongside her husband. The coverage wasn't malicious toward Camilla, but it was clear that the press and public were more excited about Charles and Catherine's partnership than they had ever been about traditional royal arrangements. The implied comparison stung more than direct criticism would have. At home, Charles began consulting Catherine on matters he had previously discussed only with his closest advisors. He valued her outsider's perspective on royal protocols that had become so ingrained, he had stopped questioning their effectiveness. Catherine's suggestions were often simple but revolutionary, proposing changes that would make the monarchy more accessible without compromising its dignity. One evening, Charles called Catherine directly to discuss an upcoming state visit. Bypassing the usual channels of communication through William, their conversation lasted over an hour, covering everything from ceremonial details to cultural sensitivities. Camilla, arriving home from her own engagement, heard Charles's laughter echoing from his study, and realized he was having the kind of animated discussion they hadn't shared in months. The household staff began to notice subtle changes in routines. Charles asked for Catherine's preferences when planning menus for family gatherings. He inquired about her schedule when arranging his own calendar, wanting to ensure they could coordinate their increasingly frequent joint appearances. The domestic arrangements that had once revolved around Camilla's comfort and preferences began shifting to accommodate Catherine's needs and availability. Camilla's closest friends expressed concern about the changes they observed. During a private lunch, one longtime companion gently suggested that Camilla might want to arrange more intimate time with Charles, to reconnect without the distractions of family and official duties. But Camilla found herself reluctant to compete for her husband's attention. Uncomfortable with the idea of having to work to reclaim space in his life that had once been naturally hers, the transformation was becoming impossible to ignore. Charles, who had spent years fighting for Camilla's acceptance and recognition, was now unconsciously shifting his emotional investment towards someone whose presence seemed to energize him in ways that their long-established relationship no longer could. The irony was heartbreaking for Camilla. who had sacrificed so much to be with Charles, only to watch him develop a connection with Catherine that appeared effortless and natural. As autumn deepened, the patterns became more entrenched. Charles and Catherine's professional partnership strengthened with each shared engagement, while Camilla found herself increasingly relegated to separate but parallel activities. The woman who had once been Charles's closest confidant was slowly becoming a witness to his emotional evolution, watching from the sidelines as her husband discovered new sources of joy and connection within his own family. The turning point came during a family crisis that nobody had anticipated. Princess Charlotte fell seriously ill during a school trip, requiring immediate hospitalization. William was abroad on official duties, unreachable for several crucial hours, leaving Catherine to handle the emergency alone. In her panic and fear, she called Charles directly, her voice breaking as she explained the situation from the hospital corridor. Charles canceled his appointments immediately and drove to the hospital himself, arriving to find Catherine in the waiting room, her usual composure shattered by maternal fear. Her hands shook as she tried to explain the medical details, and Charles found himself taking charge in ways that surprised them both. He spoke with doctors, arranged for the best specialists, and used his influence to ensure Charlotte received immediate attention. Throughout the long night at the hospital, Charles stayed by Catherine's side, offering comfort and practical support. He brought her coffee and food she couldn't eat, made necessary phone calls to family members, and simply sat with her during the worst moments of waiting for test results. Catherine, vulnerable in ways she rarely allowed herself to be in public, leaned on Charles's strength with a trust that deepened their relationship permanently. When Charlotte's condition stabilized and she was released the next morning, Catherine's gratitude toward Charles was profound and genuine. She had seen him not as the king or even as William's father, but as a man who dropped everything to help his family in crisis. The experience created a bond between them that transcended their formal relationship, establishing an emotional connection built on shared worry and mutual support. Camilla learned about the hospital vigil through royal staff, not from Charles himself. She had been at a spa retreat, unreachable during the crucial hours when the crisis unfolded. By the time she returned and tried to call Charles, the emergency was over, and she found herself in the position of offering belated support for a situation that had already been resolved. Without her involvement, the incident highlighted how Charles's instincts now turned toward Catherine during family emergencies. He hadn't thought to contact Camilla first, hadn't sought her advice or comfort during those frightening hours. His natural response had been to protect and support Catherine, to be the steady presence she needed during her moment of greatest vulnerability. The realization troubled Camilla deeply, suggesting that her role in Charles's emotional life was more peripheral than she had understood. In the days following Charlotte's recovery, Charles visited Catherine and the children more frequently, checking on their well-being with the concern of someone who had shared their fear. These visits became less formal and more intimate, with Charles often arriving unannounced to see how everyone was feeling. Catherine welcomed his attention with warmth that seemed natural and unforced, grateful for his genuine care during their family's difficult time. The media, sensing a story but lacking specific details about the hospital incident, began speculating about the increasingly close relationship between the King and the Princess of Wales. Articles appeared suggesting that Charles had found in Catherine the daughter he had never had, someone who brought out his protective and nurturing instincts in ways that his formal role usually didn't allow. William, returning from his overseas duties to find his family recovered and his father deeply involved in their care, felt mixed emotions about the situation. He was grateful for Charles's support during his absence, but also somewhat unsettled by how naturally his wife and father had connected during the crisis. The dynamic seemed to have shifted permanently, creating a three-way relationship that felt both comfortable and slightly unbalanced. Camilla attempted to reassert her position by organizing family gatherings and trying to include herself more actively in Charles's interactions with Catherine and the children, but her efforts felt forced and artificial compared to the natural ease that had developed between Charles and Catherine. The harder she tried to reclaim her central role, the more obvious it became that the emotional center of Charles's family life had shifted. Charles himself seemed largely unaware of the changes he was experiencing. To him, his growing closeness with Catherine felt natural and appropriate, the result of her proving herself during a crisis and demonstrating qualities he deeply admired. He didn't recognize that his emotional investment in Catherine was becoming something more complex than simple family affection, or that his relationship with Camilla was suffering as a result of his unconscious reallocation of attention and energy. The hospital incident became a watershed moment that accelerated changes that had been building for months. Catherine had seen Charles at his most caring and protective, while Charles had experienced the satisfaction of being genuinely needed by someone who appreciated his help without expecting it as duty. Their relationship had crossed a threshold from formal family connection to something more personal and emotionally significant. Camilla found herself increasingly isolated, watching from the outside as Charles and Catherine developed inside jokes, shared references, and the kind of comfortable intimacy that comes from having weathered a crisis together. The woman who had once been Charles's primary emotional support was slowly being replaced by someone whose presence seemed to fulfill needs that Camilla hadn't even realized her husband was experiencing. The holiday season brought the changes into sharp focus. Charles insisted on hosting Christmas at Windsor Castle, wanting to create the kind of family celebration he had always dreamed of but never quite achieved. Catherine threw herself into the planning with enthusiasm, working closely with Charles to design traditions that would appeal to all generations, while honoring royal customs. Their collaboration on Christmas preparations revealed how naturally they worked together. Catherine's suggestions for modernizing certain traditions aligned perfectly with Charles's vision for a more relatable monarchy. They spent hours discussing menu changes, gift exchanges, and activities for the children, their conversations flowing with an ease that made the household staff comment on how well-suited they seemed as planning partners. Camilla found herself increasingly sidelined during these discussions. When she offered suggestions, they were politely acknowledged but rarely implemented. Charles and Catherine had developed their own rhythm of communication, finishing each other's thoughts and building on each other's ideas in ways that excluded input from others. The Christmas planning became yet another arena where Camilla felt like an outsider in her own home. The decorating of the castle became a family event that highlighted the shifting dynamics. Charles worked alongside Catherine and the children to hang ornaments and arrange displays, his laughter echoing through rooms that had hosted centuries of royal celebrations. He told stories about past Christmases, shared memories of his own childhood, and created new traditions with a joy that seemed to rejuvenate him. Catherine listened to Charles's stories with genuine interest, asking questions that encouraged him to share more memories and observations. She made him feel like a treasure trove of wisdom and experience rather than simply an elderly relative to be politely tolerated. Her attention was focused and appreciative, making Charles feel valued for his knowledge and perspective in ways he hadn't experienced in years. Camilla participated in the decorating, but her contributions felt dutiful rather than joyful. She watched Charles light up in Catherine's presence, noting how his posture straightened, and his voice became more animated when speaking to his daughter-in-law. The contrast with his more subdued interactions with Camilla was becoming impossible to ignore, painful in its obviousness. Christmas Eve dinner showcased the new family dynamic in full display. Charles and Catherine worked together to ensure everyone felt included and entertained, their partnership seamless and natural. They shared meaningful glances when the children said something amusing, consulted each other about timing for various activities, and created an atmosphere of warmth that made the formal dining room feel intimate and welcoming. William observed his father and wife's collaboration with growing unease. While he appreciated how well they got along, something about their connection felt too intense, too exclusive of others at the table. He noticed how Catherine's attention focused on Charles during conversations, how his father's eyes sought Catherine's reactions to his comments, and how Camilla seemed to withdraw further into herself as the evening progressed. The gift exchange on Christmas morning revealed another layer of the evolving relationships. Charles had chosen Catherine's gifts with obvious care and thought, selecting items that reflected his attention to her interests and preferences. Catherine's gifts to Charles were equally thoughtful, demonstrating an understanding of his personality that went beyond surface-level knowledge. Their mutual appreciation was evident and touching, but also somehow intimate in ways that made others feel like observers. Camilla's gifts, while appropriate and well-received, lacked the personal touch that characterized the exchange between Charles and Catherine. The difference was subtle but noticeable, highlighting how the emotional investment in relationships had shifted within the family structure. Camilla realized she was becoming someone who participated in family events rather than someone who helped create their emotional center. After the children had tired themselves out with new toys and games, Charles and Catherine sat together reviewing the day's events, their conversation ranging from the success of various traditions to plans for future celebrations. Their easy intimacy was evident in their body language, the way they leaned toward each other, shared quiet laughs, and seemed completely comfortable in each other's presence. Later that evening, as family members began retiring to their rooms, Charles walked Catherine to her quarters, their conversation continuing in low tones down the corridor. Camilla, watching from the top of the stairs, saw how reluctant they seemed to end their time together, how they lingered at Catherine's door, continuing their discussion until finally saying goodnight with obvious regret. The Christmas celebration had been successful by any measure, creating memories that would last for years and establishing new traditions that reflected the family's evolution. But for Camilla, the holiday had also confirmed her worst fears about her changing place in Charles's affections. She was still his wife, still respected and included, but she was no longer the primary source of his emotional satisfaction and connection. That night, as Charles recounted the day's highlights with enthusiasm, Camilla listened with growing sadness to his praise for Catherine's organizational skills, her natural way with children, her ability to make everyone feel special and included. The woman he described with such admiration was everything Camilla had once been for him, but was no longer. The pain of being replaced even by someone as deserving as Catherine was becoming unbearable to carry alone. The new year brought a conversation that Camilla had been dreading, but knew was inevitable. She found Charles in his study on a quiet January morning, surrounded by plans for upcoming engagements that prominently featured Catherine's involvement. The sight of her husband enthusiastically organizing his schedule around another woman's availability finally broke through Camilla's carefully maintained composure. She sat across from Charles and spoke with a directness that surprised them both. Camilla acknowledged the beauty of his relationship with Catherine, praised the positive energy it brought to the family, but also admitted her own feelings of displacement and confusion. Her voice remained steady as she described watching their connection deepen, seeing Charles discover aspects of himself that their own relationship no longer seemed to inspire. Charles listened with growing discomfort, recognizing truths in Camilla's words that he had been avoiding. He hadn't intended to hurt her, hadn't consciously chosen to invest less emotional energy in their relationship, but he couldn't deny that Catherine's presence in his life had become increasingly important to his happiness and sense of purpose. The guilt he felt was complicated by his genuine affection for both women. The conversation revealed the complexity of emotions that had been building within their marriage. Camilla admitted she didn't blame Charles for finding joy in his relationship with Catherine, but confessed her own struggle to maintain dignity while feeling increasingly irrelevant to his emotional life. She had devoted years to supporting his reign and weathering public criticism, only to find herself competing with someone who seemed to effortlessly provide what she could no longer offer. Charles found himself unable to offer the reassurances that Camilla needed and deserved. He couldn't promise to limit his relationship with Catherine, couldn't deny the energy and satisfaction he derived from their connection, couldn't pretend that his feelings hadn't shifted in ways that affected his marriage. The honesty was painful but necessary, forcing both of them to confront changes they had been avoiding. In the days following their conversation, Camilla began making subtle adjustments to her own life and schedule. She accepted more solo engagements, spent additional time with her own family and friends, and started creating distance between herself and situations where she would have to witness Charles and Catherine's growing intimacy. The withdrawal was protective rather than angry, an attempt to preserve her dignity while processing the reality of her changing circumstances. Charles noticed Camilla's retreat, but found himself unsure how to respond. Part of him felt relief at having less tension in the household, while another part recognized the sadness of losing the companionship that had sustained him through difficult years. His relationship with Camilla had been the great love story of his earlier life, but Catherine represented something different, a connection that seemed to promise renewal and hope for his remaining years. Catherine herself remained largely unaware of the marital tensions her presence had created, She continued her relationship with Charles as naturally as it had developed, appreciating his support and guidance while offering the warmth and energy that seemed to revitalize him. Her focus was on family harmony and successful completion of royal duties, not on the complex emotions swirling around her interactions with her father-in-law. William began noticing his stepmother's increased absence from family gatherings and his father's continued enthusiasm for spending time with Catherine and the children. The pattern troubled him, though he struggled to articulate exactly what concerned him about the shifting family dynamics. He loved seeing his father happy, but worried about the cost of that happiness to others in the family. The media began picking up on Camilla's reduced public appearances alongside Charles, speculating about everything from health issues to marital problems. Palace staff worked to maintain the impression of family unity, while privately acknowledging that something fundamental had changed in the royal household dynamics. The careful management of public perception became increasingly challenging as the emotional reality became harder to hide. Camilla's friends rallied around her during this difficult period, offering support and understanding without judgment. Several had experienced similar situations in their own marriages, where long-term relationships evolved in ways that left one partner feeling displaced or undervalued. Their wisdom and empathy helped Camilla process her feelings without bitterness toward either Charles or Catherine. As winter progressed, the new patterns became entrenched. Charles and Catherine's professional and personal partnership continued to flourish, bringing positive attention to the monarchy and genuine satisfaction to both participants. Meanwhile, Camilla created a parallel life that intersected with theirs during necessary occasions, but maintained emotional distance to protect herself from further pain. The situation had no villains, only human beings navigating complex emotions and changing relationships with as much grace as possible. Charles had found unexpected renewal in his connection with Catherine. Catherine had discovered a meaningful relationship with her father-in-law that enriched her own sense of family, and Camilla was learning to redefine her role and identity within a marriage that no longer provided the emotional centrality she had once enjoyed. The royal household adapted to accommodate these new realities, with staff learning to manage schedules and expectations around the altered family dynamics. Everyone involved tried to maintain respect and affection for each other while acknowledging that some changes couldn't be reversed or undone, only accepted and managed with as much wisdom and kindness as possible. Spring arrived at Windsor Castle with a sense of quiet resolution that settled over the royal household like morning mist. The dramatic tensions of winter had given way to an acceptance of new realities, with each member of the family finding ways to navigate their changed relationships with dignity and grace. The emotional storms had passed, leaving behind a landscape that was different but not necessarily broken. Camilla had discovered unexpected freedom in her reduced role within Charles's emotional life. Without the pressure of being his primary source of companionship and support, she was able to pursue her own interests and relationships with renewed energy. Her charitable work expanded, her friendships deepened, and she began developing aspects of her identity that had been overshadowed by her intense focus on supporting Charles's reign and weathering public scrutiny. The Queen Consort found particular satisfaction in mentoring young women entering public service, sharing hard-won wisdom about maintaining personal integrity while fulfilling institutional obligations. Her experience of navigating complex family dynamics with grace became a source of strength for others facing similar challenges. Camilla's retreat from the center of Charles's attention had inadvertently allowed her to discover her own center of purpose and influence. Charles continued his close relationship with Catherine, but the intensity of their early connection had settled into something more sustainable and appropriate. Their professional partnership remained strong, bringing innovation and energy to royal duties while maintaining proper boundaries. The renewal that Catherine's presence had sparked in Charles became a lasting gift, restoring his enthusiasm for his role and his hope for the monarchy's future. The king learned to appreciate different types of relationships for their unique contributions to his life. His love for Camilla evolved into something more comfortable and less demanding, while his affection for Catherine provided inspiration and motivation for his work. The complexity of human emotions allowed him to value both women for different reasons, without feeling that appreciation for one diminished his care for the other. Catherine herself had grown from the experience, developing a deeper understanding of family dynamics and the delicate balance required to maintain harmony among strong personalities. Her relationship with Charles had taught her valuable lessons about leadership and service, while her inadvertent role in changing family dynamics had shown her the responsibility that comes with influence and affection. William found peace with the new family structure, recognizing that his father's happiness ultimately benefited everyone. Even if the path to that happiness had been complicated and sometimes painful, he watched his children enjoy unprecedented access to their grandfather, witnessed his wife's continued growth as a royal figure, and observed his stepmother's emergence as an independent force for good in her own right. The household staff adapted to serving a family that operated with more independence and less traditional hierarchy than in previous years. Schedules were coordinated to accommodate multiple centers of activity, with Charles and Catherine's joint engagements balanced against Camilla's solo projects and William's own duties. The complexity required more careful management, but also reflected a more modern and flexible approach to royal responsibilities. Public perception of the family remained positive, with media coverage focusing on the successful joint initiatives of Charles and Catherine, while respecting Camilla's continued contributions to charitable causes. The press had learned to appreciate multiple narratives of royal service rather than expecting a single, unified story from the family's public appearances. As summer approached, the family gathered for another celebration, this time Prince George's birthday. The party revealed how far they had all traveled in terms of accepting and working within their new dynamic. Charles and Catherine collaborated naturally on party planning. Camilla contributed her own special touches while maintaining appropriate distance, and William orchestrated the overall event with confidence in his family's ability to function harmoniously despite their complex relationships. The birthday celebration was joyful and relaxed, with genuine affection evident among all family members. Charles's happiness was obvious as he played with his grandchildren. Catherine's warmth created an inclusive atmosphere that made everyone feel valued, and Camilla's presence added grace and stability to the gathering. The evolution of their relationships had led not to fracture, but to a more nuanced and ultimately stronger family structure. Looking back on the changes that had transformed their lives, each person could recognize both losses and gains in their journey. Camilla had lost her position as Charles's primary emotional focus, but had gained independence and self-respect. Charles had experienced the complexity of loving different people in different ways, while learning to appreciate the unique gifts each relationship offered. Catherine had discovered the responsibility and satisfaction of meaningful family connections while contributing to the monarchy's continued relevance. The story that had begun with subtle shifts and growing tensions had resolved into something unexpected but ultimately positive. Rather than destroying existing relationships, the changes had transformed them into something more honest and sustainable. The royal family had learned that love and loyalty could take many forms, that happiness didn't require exclusivity, and that adaptation could lead to growth rather than loss. As evening fell over Windsor Castle on that spring day, 3 remarkable women and 1 grateful man had found ways to honor their connections to each other, while pursuing their individual paths toward fulfillment and service. The shadows that had once threatened to divide them had lifted, replaced by a warm light that illuminated the possibility of family harmony, even in the midst of complex and evolving emotions.